Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Masks Off. I'm Kim,
And I'm Tia.
and we are so excited to be here today and record because we are actually going to talk about another mask. And it's one that neither Tia nor I really have a lot of experience with.
Nope.
But it's a mask. And so our show is Masks Off. So we want to cover all the masks that we possibly can. So that's why we're going to dive in today and talk about this new mask. But let me start with our quote first. So the quote is, "No child is destined to be rebellious at any age. Rebellion is a reaction to feeling shamed for who they are." And that's Carol Tuttle. Wow, this is what we live to talk about in this podcast. This is what we live, like, this is our journey. This is it. This is what we do. We talk about, how being shamed for who you are can lead to so many of the masks, right? That we talk about. I mean, certainly mine that I've talked about, the perfection mask, the people pleaser mask for sure, come from me not feeling like it's okay to be myself.
Exactly. So it's just these different flavors of masks, right? So, we both of us have that perfection people pleaser aspect. I didn't really dip in rebellion. I was the rule follower, right? Because we were people pleasers. So people pleasers, we don't bend the rules. I mean, we may speak our truth and for injustice or whatever, but it's different than rebellion. In my eyes, at least. Who knows, maybe if I deconstruct a little more, maybe some of it was rebellion as I go back. But so it comes back to, are we being seen and heard as we are and accepted? And so for some people, they get rebellious.
So do you want to take a stab first at what is the rebellion mask?
Sure. I mean, this kind of came up in one of our previous podcasts, which is why we're diving into this. And I love it because it's not our experience. So we would love to hear from listeners or in our Facebook community or on Instagram, what's your experience with the rebellion mask? Because I'm going to say, right, because we could be projecting because we haven't lived it.
100%. So we can only speak from what we think, but it's not our experience. So if somebody wants to, share with us or correct us or whatever, feel free to.
Right. We're open to always learning and growing. So having said that disclaimer, one example that came to mind when we were talking about this is, I work with parents, and I have a client we just do check-ins now, but has a rebellious teenage daughter. And it's rebellious in quotes, right? Because she's just acting out to get her needs met. And so when we reframe that rebellion as a way of meeting her needs are not being met, as you mentioned from the quote, not feeling seen, being shamed for who she was. And this was not this parent's intention, of course, when she was little, to shame her and to not accept her for who she is, because we're coming from our own woundedness when we're parenting our kids without having that awareness until we have it. And so her daughter would sneak out at night, be with friends, say one thing, but actually be doing another. And the parent started to notice, she's like, wait, these aren't lining up. And she would confront her child and she would deny them, right? Because what happens if she were to tell the truth? She would be punished. She would be shamed. How dare you? What were you thinking? And so over time, supporting this mom, she learned to come with curiosity and compassion and started to see this as, oh, my child's needs are not being met. I wasn't allowing her to be herself. And as over time, like I said, this was from a while ago, and now we'll just do check-ins, the relationship has shifted and changed. Now, does her daughter still sometimes fall into the rebellion aspect? Sure, just like all of us put our masks on and take them off. But their connection has gotten deeper, so the rebellion has become less. She's not sneaking beautiful out. And so it just shows you that when we connect from that heart space, from our adult self, not from our ego, not from our wounded self, and we can meet our child as they are, so she can feel seen, heard, and valued, and understand, okay, what need isn't there? Oh, I was shaming her for going out and lying to me, when in reality, she was doing that to protect herself. So
Right.
so the rebellion mask is a form of protection. It's not personal to the parent. It's not that this person chooses to be bad intentionally. And then the other aspect too is, sometimes we say, oh, that's my rebellious child. So we can put our child into that box.
Yes.
Because when they were little, they were naughty, or they didn't listen, or you said one thing and they did it anyway. And so then all of a sudden it's like, well, if mom or dad think I'm rebellious, I better step into that role, because that's what they're expecting. They don't even know who I am. But if I'm the bad child, the rebellious child, and my sibling is the perfect angel, the people pleaser, perfectionist, they're going to just continue to make choices to fulfill that. So there's that co-creation aspect as well. And they're not, kids don't do it consciously per se.
Right. It's the conditioning that happens.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So what's your experience?
Well, I'm thinking of a couple of things. Actually, I'm thinking when you said how, in the example that the mom started to show up differently with the daughter, and then she felt safer, the daughter felt safer to share. It reminded me of a show, I keep bringing up these sitcoms, but one from a long time ago, I think maybe early 2000s. It was My Wife and Kids.
Okay. I never saw it.
Okay. So it's My Wife and Kids. I think it was with one of the Wayans brothers. I can't remember which one, but what they did is that, I can't remember the exact words he used to describe it, but it was like a family meeting, so to speak. And when they were in the family meeting, that anything that they said was safe, and they were guaranteed not to have a consequence for it. So, right. So it was so funny, because the dad, Kyle, so wanted to, because in this one scene, they all started, and they were maybe like 17, 15, and 7 were the ages of the kids, right? So the little one says oh, I did such and such, in a cute little way. It was hardly anything. But she could say it safely, no consequences, right. No repercussions. And then Claire, the middle child, would say something like, I snuck out of the house and met up with this boy. And Kyle is wanting to but he has to hold the family sanction together by saying no consequences. Okay. Thank you, Claire, for being so honest and sharing that with me when he's dying inside. And then Junior, who's the oldest one, he's 17. He's just always doing something, stupid or whatever. And so he would say what he did, I don't know, that, I think he may have said something about pornography or something on the computer. And again, then the mom is but she had to it goes to what you were just saying. And that allows them to be able to be themselves, speak up and say, and know that it's okay to make a mistake.
Right.
And it's okay. It's you're not being shamed, as the quote says, for feeling shame for who you are. Right. We all are going to make mistakes, especially at that age. It's
or experiment or do, it's just part of figuring out life and where your place is in the world. And when you provide that safe container for sharing, it doesn't mean you're just oh, okay, hands off. That's, so it's stepping in and having a conversation later outside of that meeting and just say, hey, I just wanted to check in. Is there anything you want to talk about? It gives you that opportunity to have those conversations around safety, choices, what happens with this, or if you're in a peer situation, it just starts to create that connection of hey, I've got your back.
Yeah.
I've got your
back. Learning moment can make it a teachable moment.
Right.
Right. You can try to teach, but yes, I've got your back. I support you. I'm not shaming you. There's no separation, because if you shame and punish, there's going to be separation between you and your child. And that's just.
And you can still express your concerns.
Yeah.
Hey, I've noticed X, Y, Z, or did you think about if you make this choice, then there's this thing you need to think about. So it doesn't mean you're condoning a rebellious
act.
choice that that child made, whether it was a conscious choice or unconscious, right? Because that's all the brain development aspect, which we won't get into. But so there's that big difference between, so it's that acceptance of the as is. It already happened. Your kid already did this thing that you had deemed as rebellious, whether it is or not is another conversation, but it happened. So now what? So you have that choice, accept, change, or leave. What are you going to do? Are you going to just accept it, move on? Oh, it was a one-time thing, and then see if it happens again, or have a conversation like, hey, if this were to happen again, make sure blah, 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 a simple example, and it's a scary example, it's your teenagers out drinking and they get in a car with someone who's been drinking. That's something, it happened, but is shaming going to help that situation for them to make a choice that's different the next time around? No, they can hide it more. And because if you shame them, well, screw that, mom's doesn't care. She just makes me feel bad, versus, hey, if you're in that situation again, here are some options for you, because it's your safety and getting home safe, and that other child driving a car under the influence, that's not okay either. So what could you do differently next time? So you don't always have to provide the answers. Let them find it within, because they know. Kids know, they know inherently what's right and wrong, but they get put into situations that are challenging.
So I totally agree. And I've done the shaming thing for sure. And that example of the sitcom and the family, that's a nice example of how it could look, in a healthy way, right? Have that, and then have the conversation after. And, you, like you said earlier, you don't know what you don't know until you know it. Exactly. And so, when my kids were young, I didn't know how to do it differently. So I was sharing with you before we started recording, because, well, I want to first say, and I'm not trying to put this in a total box or black and white, but it feels to me like we either go in one direction or another. You either are the people pleaser, the rule follower, or you are the one who is rebellious and acting out. At the end of the day, the underneath is the pain is the same. Exactly. It's just which way do you go with it? Or, the conditioning, the pain, the wound, the feeling of not enough is the same, or it's not okay to be who you are is the same. One acts out, one falls in line and says, I'm going to people please and I'm going to perfect. I mean, I'm just going to say it's been my experience that all the people in my world and around me seem to go one way or the other.
So I'm going to add in there, is there a possibility, just as we're talking? So one way or the other, yes, with certain in line, but could perhaps the person who goes more rebellious, they're people pleasing with the people they're hanging out with.
It could be.
You know what I mean? Like it's about belonging and feeling.
And for me, it was,
So perhaps the rebellious, the child who goes on the rebellious side is feeling seen and heard by the other kids who are acting out.
I believe so.
Because it's a wound. It's not an intentional, it's serving a purpose.
Right.
Regardless, people pleasing is serving a purpose to
take
care of ourselves. Being rebellious is serving a purpose to take care of ourselves. It's a protection measure, no matter what.
Yeah, I totally agree.
So the flavor aspect, I guess.
Exactly. I just, and it's only a curiosity that I have, and I've heard this a lot from parents who have said, and it's been my case too, that I've parented the same way. I parented my kids the same way, and one is this way and one is that way. Like my, daughter is totally more on the rebellious side versus my son, who's now he did, again, like you just said, he did go against the grain, but in a way more of the acceptance, like just wanting to be accepted. I certainly did have my times when I was in high school where I quote unquote was rebellious, like but the drinking or the things I shouldn't be doing. But it was to belong as well. Right. And my sister was more the other, like more rebellious in terms of I guess I'm looking at rebellious as maybe speaking up and speaking out along with acting out, as versus maybe not speaking out so much.
Well, and I think it depends too, really. I think that's a great point. It's not always actions. It could, meaning like, oh, the kid's going to go steal a car, like it can
Right.
be speaking up. So
Yes.
are we falling into the, I'm going to be less seen and heard because that feels more protective versus I'm going to get
Yes.
bigger.
Yes. That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Because I do it. I mean, Ozzy's, I think, is playing with the cat and just got a swipe to his nose, if I had to guess.
Oh, poor thing.
Oh, I know. He's coming for attention now.
Yes.
So noticing that, are we shutting down or are we getting big? So it's almost like fight or flight or fawn or free. So it really maybe it falls into what is our nervous system typical response when we feel out of safety. Do we immediately fight back, rebellious?
Yes.
When I think rebellion, I'm not thinking necessarily, oh, the kid, the one who breaks all the rules.
I'm not thinking that either. I think that's a piece of it, but go ahead. Like, I think there's more.
And so then the people pleaser perfectionist abandons themselves.
Yes.
To take care of others. So fight or flight.
Yes.
So they're flighting from themselves, but it could be more that fawn, just, okay, I'm going to shrink myself and just give up. It's the, so when the lion is chasing the impala and they know their time is done, they just freeze. And fall and just give up, versus a lion with another lion is going to fight.
Yeah. And so I see that and hear that, like I hear parents saying, oh yeah, like just so butt heads with my one child. We butt heads all the time. It's like this love-hate thing, but we're always butting heads, like, and the fists coming together. For those of you who can't see, my fists are coming together. And then you hear the parents say, but my other child, such an angel, right? Like, oh, just meaning that the other child is a people pleaser and follows the rules and just keeps quiet and keeps shut. That was me.
Mm-hmm.
That was me. I just I wouldn't think twice about speaking up or speaking out against my parents. And back when I was growing up, I don't know about you, but that was deemed a really good quality. Like, you didn't talk back to your parents.
No, right? And the kid who did, it's like, oh my goodness, if they were the rebellious one, if you talk to me like that, oh, it would have been,
Look at that conditioning right there, right? Like, that was like a badge of honor to say, I didn't speak back or, talk back to my parents.
Right.
And I will tell you that honestly, there was one time when I was 16. So you can,
right.
If I'm going to be in a rebellious stage, might as well be. There was one time where I was in an argument with my mother, and she was just, I felt she was being very unfair and in the wrong. And I think she said something to me, and then I said, F you to her. Right. And she raised her arm to hit me, and I blocked her arm. And then I stormed out of the house, and I got on my bike, and I'm like, I'm running away. And that was like the one and only time like that I did that. And I was like, it was such a big deal. I just didn't do it, right. but my sister was different. She all the time, just, kind of spoke out. And my daughter's the same way. And I was sharing with you, like, she has no problem at all, like, speaking up to me or her father. She will put us right in our place. But let me just say that when she was like 10 or 11 and she was really starting to use her voice, that was around the time when I started becoming aware of Dr. Shafali, and I started becoming aware of conscious parenting.
Yep.
And I'm so grateful that I did then, especially with her, because she's a girl and she can speak out and speak up, that I didn't quiet her. I didn't silence her.
Exactly. And so then what we were talking about before we hit record too is speaking up, is it coming from ego and defenses and woundedness, or is speaking up coming from truth and your true self? Because again, I'm making an assumption here. Dr. Shefali says this too, the rebellious child is the more awakened one.
Yes.
Because they're not going to be put into that box and shut down and completely abandon themselves.
Yeah.
Now, sometimes that rebellion, just to keep it simple, because we're encompassing speaking up and all of that, is coming from true self. Like, no, I am not going to abandon myself, and I am going to speak up. So it's whether or not that reaction, if it's a reaction, it's rebellion mask, right? Because it's protecting its woundedness, its ego.
Yes.
Or are you speaking up from authenticity and connection to your heart? Because being awakened, being authentic doesn't mean we don't speak up.
Exactly. Oh yeah. It's quite the contrary. And one of the things that I really like my whole life, even when I was young and I was, didn't use my voice. The one thing that I always saw when I saw that in others, I envied that.
Yeah.
Like I so wanted and so wished I could speak up and speak out, not again, from an authentic place,
right?
Not from the wounded place, just from an authentic place. I wanted to be able to use my voice. And I love it when my daughter does it. I just like, I celebrate inside when she says, to me, like even now, like, no one's gonna, I like what you said from the movie. No, what is it? Dirty Dancing. No one's going to put
no one
baby
puts
in
baby in a corner.
In a corner. I love that. And that's really the energy that she comes from. And part of me wishes, and it's growing and it's happening, but part of me says, oh, I love for my son to have more of that. And he is growing into that, but it's less his nature. That's why I was asking that question early on. Is there some nature nurture thing going on? Like, is there a part of like, when we come into the world, are we more slanted toward going one way or the other? Because again, I parented pretty much both my kids the same way. And my daughter is more towards speaking up and speaking out, and my son is not.
Right.
So
I do think there's a nature piece. I mean, we inherently come into this world.
Yeah.
Because we're our true self, right? When we are born, we are 100% us. Because we don't have the conditioning. I suppose there's some influence in the womb and whatnot, from stress and but we're as connected to ourselves as we are. And so both of my daughters were colicky, twin colicky babies, screamed, had opinions. And both of mine are not afraid to speak up in certain situations. And then so there's a little bit, how you're talking, are you either this or that? My daughters have both. Total people pleaser, and I'm going to speak up, so same like you, when they stood up to me in teenage years, and, did I like it? Absolutely not, because it hurt my ego, right?
Yeah.
But the reality it was like, I want you to push back. I want you to stand up and voice your opinion with me and tell me, you know what, I don't think that's fair, Mom. You need to look at yourself. Or, they would call me out all the time. And that helped me grow and step into my truth.
I agree.
And I didn't want to shut them down, because I knew, like you said, women want them to keep their voice. So when they go into adulthood, they have that inner strength. And so it's that balance. But then I also see the people pleaser aspect, and I completely lost my train of thought of this. But it's the dance.
Yeah.
So the nurture, or was the nature aspect. So I know both of my daughters have that oomph in them, connection to self. And it's just situational, where we, because of conditioning, particularly, it's the people pleaser.
So do you think from early on, when they were little, that they had the people pleaser, or like, was it more they had the speak up, speak out, and then the people pleaser came in later on from some conditioning? Maybe not you, maybe from peers or other people. And you brought in people pleaser. Yeah. So like, can you remember back to when they were little, which if they were then, and it doesn't really matter, because I'm just always curious about this, but if they were one way or the other.
I think more standing, like really solid, but also really connected to that inner peace aspect too, but an inner peace, not a people pleaser piece. And then over time, because like you, I was not aware of conscious parenting until they were in middle school. I was on my
Right.
own self-growth journey, but I hadn't made the
Yes.
connection between how my reaction, my need for control, was influencing my parenting. So I did shame, and I did, like they made a mess, and it was like, oh my Lord, the world is falling down. So I influenced that to,
Yeah.
we don't want to upset mom because she needs everything in control. So
Yeah.
I mean, I take full responsibility for that, and I can't change it, but
Yeah.
I could work on repairing over the years, the more work I did on myself and how I responded to them. But I also think I
Absolutely.
still had that inner connection piece too. It was just when I would get activated where that ugly part of my wounded self would get scared, and I'd have to protect myself and project onto them. But when I was calm and I was in a really good balanced state, I didn't do that. But that's the journey, right?
Yeah.
So it is what it is, but we just continue to take another step, which we talk about all the time.
We talk about it all the time.
Right.
Yeah, I do agree with what you're saying. And that leads me to think, and it's a good point too. And then we can start to round up, is that you were talking about earlier about the teenager that might go and get in the car, and if the person's been drinking. And I used to do a lot of that shaming because I was coming from a total place of fear.
Totally.
Right. And you just mentioned about wanting to control. And why do we want to control? Well, Dr. Shefali teaches us that all the time, right? You're in fear, like lack, fear, anxiety, and then you want to control. Anytime you're in fear or you're feeling anxious or in lack, what do? I try to control
the external,
because my internal is so a mess.
Exactly.
So rather than when they were in the teenage years, rather than being able to come from that space of calm and centered and, hey, let's have a conversation about, not getting in the car with someone who would actually, to be honest, and this is where they felt more my son than my daughter, but really felt shame, was I was huge on not having them get in a car with a parent that had been drinking.
Sure.
Now that's a reasonable boundary.
Yep.
Right. And it was as a 13-year-old, like he was 12, 13, 14.
Right.
And having to use his voice and say, I'm sorry, I can't get in a car with you, or tell his buddy, I can't get in the car with your mom or your dad because they've been drinking. Like, how freaking hard would that be?
Exactly.
And, so that's a tricky one. How would you have navigated that differently? Because it's a reasonable boundary, but it was so shaming for my son. And I was totally in a place of fear.
Right. And I mean, and understandable fear, right?
Right.
Because it is a reality that can happen, and I think for me, I don't know, I can only speak for myself really in this situation. I had done so much. So by the time we hit the teenage years, I feel like we were totally, I'm so grateful that I found conscious parenting when I did, because if I had been in that space, because the fears get big, right? So the fear we have when the kids are little, it's like little fears, right? For the most part, no one's gonna like potentially die. We're in teenage, like those situations, yes, someone could die. And I think it's really, have a plan B. Right now, most kids have cell phones at that age. My kids did not at that age that you were referring to, the early adolescent. But they have the text and X to your parents. Like, I can't talk, but I know, so I'll step in and I'll call you and be like, oh, we have a family thing. I need to come pick you up. So there's a way, so the child is not put into the situation of having to say to a peer or to that peer's parent, I'm not going to get in my car with you. Because that's hard enough for adults to do.
I know.
At times, right?
Yeah.
So how do we navigate that without shame? You meet the heart, you meet the connection, you meet the big mind, right? Not the small mind of fear, because the fear is, I'm afraid, I don't want you to get in there. It's okay to own our fear.
Right.
Right? Because if we pretend the fear isn't there, what are we teaching our kid? Ignore that fear. right? Because fear has a
Exactly.
purpose.
Yeah.
Fear can be helpful. It can be a really smart guide if we're connected to it and not letting it take over. I don't know if I answered that, but
No, you did that beautifully, beautifully. And I think I did do that at some point. One thought I wanted to share, or actually it's a question. So we talked a lot in this episode about how the rebellious mask looks, and we talked about how it looks on kids and children.
Oh, yeah.
How does it look on an adult? And again, I can't speak from experience because I'm not the rebellious one. I'm a people pleaser.
Yeah.
I'm the perfectionist. How would you say the rebellious mask shows up for adults?
Well, obviously, I think it can show up differently for all people. And, some people may stay in the rebellious aspect for a lot of their life. And then others that's their ego defense, right? So you and I, as people pleasers, may go into, I'm going to caretake and I'm going to fix and I'm going to da 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 da. They may go into, screw you, you told me I can't. Or I have to go to this thing, I'm not going to go. Or, so the rebellion can show up in, addictions, probably to some extent, depending, because it's all underlying flavors. You can't tell me what to do, I'm not going to do it. Or the rebellion could potentially, maybe, I don't know, I'm just guessing, turn into that ego aspect, rebellion of control. Like, so-and-so says that I have to parent this way. Well, I am going to do it a different. They can't tell me how to parent. How many times do we hear those challenges, like the in-laws or that person's parents is starting to judge the parenting of that person. And so let's say someone's into conscious parenting and their parent is saying, you need to control, you punish
Spank,
your kid.
punish.
So is that person going to step into conscious parenting? I mean, because that's where these flavors are, right? It can look good on the surface, but are they doing it to rebel against their parent and not being authentic in their conscious parenting and just doing the opposite, but not coming from that heart space and doing the inner work, but knowing that's where they want to go, but doing it from a disconnected space versus a connected space. So I think a lot of it is that disconnection versus connection.
Yeah, that's well said. That's well said. I like that example. So, and again, we go back to saying to our listeners, if any of you have a story you want to share or just speak from your experience, if you wear the rebellious mask, we would love to hear from you. You can let us know in our Masks Off Facebook community. You can let us know on Instagram. You can even comment on YouTube.
Definitely. And we always love having guests. So it'd be kind of fun to have a guest who's gone through the rebellion mask.
Good idea. So so if you would love to or want to try out being a guest on Masks Off, we would love to have you. You can how can they let us know?
Email probably, or just
email one of us. And then we can lead you down the path to getting signed up.
Exactly.
Yeah, that would be awesome and amazing. So if you would like to be a guest, let us know. And thank you as always for listening and supporting Tia and I.
Thanks so much. Have a good day.
Have a great one, everyone.